There's no sugarcoating this. I used to break into homes to steal. And this particular house felt like stealing candy from a toddler. It belonged to an old woman who lived alone on a suburban street with few neighbors. I had been watching it since last year when a young couple lived there. When the old lady moved in a couple months ago, I saw the perfect opportunity. My partner in crime was my younger brother Paul, whom I was introducing to the subtle art of getting in and out. My methods, though, were never violent. We just waited until the owners left, went inside, and took whatever electronics we could find. As usual, the week before we studied her routine. We parked in front of the house, memorized the time she watered the plants, took her afternoon naps, and, most importantly, when she left. Every afternoon, she was out for 1 to 2 hours. Once we confirmed the pattern, we made our move. When she drove away in her sedan, the action began. My brother parked right in front as I instructed. Taking advantage of the low-foot traffic, we brought in a hand truck, duffel bags, and gloves. With a fake moving company sign on our van, no one would suspect a thing. Our phones were left in the car. A friend of mine got caught when his Bluetooth data showed up on a house gadget. That freaked me out. We cleared out all the appliances, TVs, a washing machine, a fridge. Strangely, the old lady had never removed the framed photos of the previous family. Now I'll look for a safe, I told Paul, who was clumsily rummaging through jewelry. This was only his second break-in and he was clearly nervous. He searched every room but found nothing.
Friends, if you like these stories, be sure to subscribe and like this video, and also leave a comment telling us what you think about these stories.
Except for a large wooden door near the kitchen, locked. Aha! I heard him exclaim as he pulled a big iron key from a closet. This must be for that door. He tried it, and it opened. It led to a staircase descending into a pitch-black basement. Old folks like to keep their valuables as hidden as possible, I explained. There might be something down there. We stepped down cautiously, relying on our flashlights to guide us. With each step, the smell worsened. It was like walking into an abandoned butcher shop. I felt along the wall for a switch and flipped it on. Nothing could have prepared us for what we saw. The room was small, its concrete walls soaked in deep red stains. Chains hung from the ceiling, hooks at the ends embedded in large slabs of meat, or at least what looked like meat. Something about them wasn't right. They didn't look like they came from an animal. My brother gagged at the stench, ran to the corner, and threw up. I asked if he was okay. He nodded, wiped his mouth, and steadied himself. I wanted to get the hell out, but as I turned to leave, he pointed to something in the far corner. A human figure laid curled up, hugging its knees. A thick metal collar was locked around its neck, chained to the wall. It was a man, unconscious, severely malnourished, wearing nothing but boxer shorts. A small green light blinked on his collar. I recognized him as the man from the couple that lived here before the old lady. Paul stepped toward him and I grabbed his shoulder. We need to leave. Now. We can't just leave him here, he shot back. Yes, we can, I insisted. Our phones are in the car. We call the cops as soon as we get there. Of course, we'd have to explain why we were here in the first place, but this was too messed up to ignore. My brother didn't argue. Instead, he walked to a small equipment stand near the stairs, grabbed a medium-sized sledgehammer, and returned to the man. I was pissed, but followed him. We pushed the unconscious man aside so the chain lay flat on the ground. My brother swung the hammer. Nothing. I took it from him, put all my strength into a swing, and shattered the chain. Paul, let's go, I said as he approached the man to lift him onto his shoulders. That's when the collar light turned red. The explosion slammed me against the wall hard, and the impact knocked me out. I opened my eyes a few minutes later and saw that the man's collar had exploded, taking half his body with it. Paul had been closer to him than I was, and was lying on the floor, hurt but alive. I crawled to him, trying to wake him up, and it didn't work. Then, a sharp pain shot through my leg, and I realized something had hit me down there. There was a lot of blood, and I couldn't stand properly. Trying to wake Paul was pointless, and I decided to get back up and call 911. Fast. And that's what I did. Dragging myself up the stairs in extreme pain, I reached the phone in the living room. I was on the brink of passing out from blood loss when I gave the 911 operator the address. The moment I finished, I heard someone opening the front door and saw from the corridor 2 figures standing there. One was the old lady staring at me with a blank, cold expression. The other was a large man in a black coat, standing behind her like a bodyguard. Then I blacked out. I woke up the next day in a hospital bed. I was handcuffed, and I started shouting and crying like a baby until a cop entered seconds later. "Where's Paul?" was the first thing I asked. It might not seem like it, but this was when my nightmare truly began. I told the police everything, the burglaries and what we had found. And they told me what happened. A patrol car arrived about 15 minutes after my call. They found me unconscious on the living room floor, soaked in blood. In the basement, they discovered all that flesh and gore, along with the mangled body of a man, blown apart by the explosion. The man with the collar. My brother wasn't there anymore. Neither were the old lady and the man I had seen at the front door. The police said her modus operandi matched a case in another state, where a woman fitting her description had taken over a house, tortured, and murdered the original residents. She was likely part of a larger group. I was never charged for the burglaries. They didn't really know what to do with me. I was a victim too. It took a few weeks, but as my leg healed, I was ready to drive again, and that's what I did. Every single day from that moment on, I'm driving around town for any clue that might lead me to the old lady. The cops won't update me, so I've decided to go search through every street and neighborhood in the goddamn country if I have to. I know she still has my brother. And Paul, if you're reading this somehow, please know I'm sorry your big brother couldn't save you. But I promise I'm going to find you and get you out of this, even if it's the last thing I do. I just remembered why my parents got rid of the trellis on their house. So, I don't know why this memory has just come up, but I've been thinking about my childhood. These last few days, I woke up drenched in sweat, and even though at first I couldn't say why, I think I'm finally ready to face my past. I don't know how old I was when this happened. 8? Maybe 9? Back then, my family had just moved into a small house in the suburbs. My parents weren't rich, but we definitely lived comfortably. I never saw them worry about money, which, by today's standards, I digress. I still remember some parts of that house vividly. My own room, up on the second floor. A mailbox, white and red. My dad's garage, where he kept the car and his motorcycle. The white picket fence with the small gate. My mom's rose bushes, and the trellis that had convinced her to choose that house right at the first moment she had laid eyes upon it. You know what that is, right? That strange wooden framework that lets plants climb up the facade of your house. My mom loved the idea, and when I talked with her a few days ago, she brought it up again, which I think made me remember as well. It all started about a year after we moved in. Late at night, hours past my bedtime, I was still up in my room, reading and playing. I couldn't tell you for the life of me what I was reading or what kept me awake, but I think I can remember quite a few instances of myself enjoying the night and the calmness after everyone else had gone to sleep back then. It was kind of my thing, you could say. Whatever. I remember hearing those footsteps outside while still playing with my toys, and somehow something about them drew my attention. Maybe it was because it was already late at night. Or maybe they stood out because the neighborhood wasn't even lively during the day, much less after the sun had gone down. Or was it because they weren't normal footsteps, not the sounds of someone walking down the street, but rather of a person dancing? It disturbs me to this day. I put down my toys and went to the window to take a look at what was happening. We had 3 street lamps along the road running past my parents' house, and just between the one on the right and the one almost in front of the property, I could see him. A guy, dressed in what I would describe as a gaudy outfit, complete with a top hat on his head, was slowly coming down the street. I don't know what kind of dance he imitated, but it had to be one of those ballroom ones, I think. He was twirling around, had his arms raised as if he had a partner, and kept to this strange rhythm all along. I was kind of intrigued, to be honest. It looked funny and non-threatening, at least until the man suddenly stopped. It was like he had frozen mid-dance, had his head turned to the side while he was balancing on one foot. Yeah, I think that was the first time in my life I felt uneasy. Something was wrong about that man, I remember thinking. Then I froze as the strange man leisurely turned his head, then his shoulders, then slowly whirled around on his one foot. He looked up at me. Not just at the house, but at me. I felt it back then, and I can still remember it so vividly, this feeling of eyes staring right into my soul. I watched helplessly as the man raised his hand and started waving. It might sound like a nice gesture, but believe me, I whimpered when I saw it. His face was covered by the shadow of the brim of his head, and yet I could still feel it, that he wasn't smiling. I pushed myself away from the window, jumped into my bed, and pulled the blanket quickly over my head. A very childish reaction, right? I mean, I was a child, scared and afraid, because I still thought Mom or Dad might punish me if they found out I had stayed up past bedtime again. So I tried to resolve this mess on my own. Honestly, I should have screamed my head off then and there, but I didn't. I kept cowering beneath the blanket, listening for the noise of the man returning to his normal dance routine, but that didn't happen either. All I could hear was the beating of my own heart, right up in my ears. I was crying while I held the blanket over my head and prayed silently for the man to just disappear. Why didn't the footsteps start up again, I asked myself. How had he noticed me, up here standing silently in my dark room? My heart was beating so fast I thought it would break my ribs, and then the one noise I dreaded more than anything reached my ears. The gate to our lawn swung open. I was shaking in my bed. The strange man was coming, my mind told me. Coming for me. I kept listening, but couldn't even hear his footsteps. My heart was still racing, drowning out the sound of my own thoughts. What if he rang the doorbell? Would someone open the door for him? I felt myself whimpering again and clasped one hand over my mouth to stop any noise from coming out. Maybe the man didn't know where I was, I told myself. As long as I stayed extra quiet, he might just turn around and leave again. Looking back now, I really was completely out of my mind from fright. I could feel my lungs starting to burn with the hand still clasped tightly over my mouth. The only sound I could hear was my heartbeat. No one was ringing the doorbell, no one was walking around outside. I started letting out air again and tried to keep my breath shallow and silent, but failed miserably. Something about that sight had shaken me to my core. But now, there was no noise coming from the man anymore. Seconds passed that felt like an eternity, then minutes. Slowly, my heartbeat sank and my breathing returned to normal. I was still cowering beneath my blanket, still shaking like a leaf while my pajamas were drenched in sweat, but nothing happened outside anymore. To keep myself from completely spiraling, I started to count my breaths. First to 100, then 2, then 3. Nothing happened. The night outside my window was calm and almost silent. There were no scratching noises, no footsteps, nor anything like that. I began wondering if I had just imagined the sound of the gate before. After a few more minutes, I even felt my muscles relaxing a bit. The blanket wasn't shaking anymore as my own tremors slowed, then stopped. Had I just imagined it all? In my childish mind, that really did seem possible. I wasn't sure if the man had existed at all, if I even had been awake before. Maybe it all was just a bad dream, I told myself. Slowly, I lowered the blanket. Just a bit at first, enough to take a look at the window. The night outside was as dark and calm as before. I kept staring at it, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. My chest was still hurting and my lungs seemed strained, but I soon began to feel at least a little bit more at ease. Pushing the blanket to my feet, I ever so slowly started to move. First, I only put one foot out of bed, looked at the window, and found it still the same as before. Then the other leg. All the while, I was listening for any noise or sound from outside, but nothing was going on out there, so I stood up from the bed. Was it just bravado? An urge to prove to myself that I wasn't a scared little child? No. The thing that drove me on the most was that I knew I wouldn't be able to fall asleep if I didn't look outside at least once. All those nightmares would keep me awake, I knew. So I ducked down and started to sneak toward the window. Always on the watch for anything happening outside, I slowly crept forward. Even though I tried to tell myself that it had all been nothing but a dream, part of me still warned me not to be careless. I remember those moments so well. The smell of my room, the doggy lying on the floor, making me step around them to keep the noise to a minimum. The sight of the moon full and bright, up in the sky between the stars. My hands were shaking slightly, and I could feel my heart rate picking up once more. The top of the street lamp came into view. I crept forward, past the small desk and the chair. The fence of our neighbor's lawn was calm and closed and looked just like the one here. I started to grow hopeful. It had all been just a dream. Another step, and I was only one more away from the window. The night was calm, yet I could still feel this strange tension. I swallowed my fear, took one more breath, then pushed myself forward. Down there by the street lamp was the gate and the white picket fence. It stood open. I could feel my heart almost jumping out of my chest. Sweat was running down my cheeks. In the light of the lamp, I could see something more. Footsteps in the wet grass, leading straight across the lawn toward the house, toward the trellis. My mind seemed to crumble. I couldn't move my body anymore. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. The shadowy shape of a gaudy suit blowing in the soft breeze right next to my window. A face, half covered in darkness. Eyes that looked down at me through the pane, staring right into my soul. He was grinning. I felt it more than I saw it. Grinning while staring at me. His face came closer to the window, and I stood there like a deer in headlights. I couldn't even scream, so scared was I. The sound of him smacking his lips has been engraved in my mind. I don't know what he planned or even wanted. All I can remember now is the noise the struts of the trellis gave off as the man shifted forward and tried to grab hold of my window's frame. This low, moaning noise just before they broke. He let out a scream, and with it, I cried out as well, shouting for my mom and dad as the man fell down and howled in anger. Lights turned on all around the street as I ran away from the window and headed toward my parents' bedroom. I don't really remember what happened next. Only that my dad removed every last piece of the trellis the following day, and my mom stayed with me wherever I went from then on for what felt like a year. I slept in my parents' room for the next few months, and soon after we moved again. Somehow I must have buried this whole episode somewhere deep in my mind. It only came up again when Mom talked about the trellis she used to have and the great plans she had for it, but never could turn into reality. Dad has already passed away, and I have my own family and children now to take care of. We live in a small, calm suburb with nice and inexpensive schools close by. Only yesterday, I woke up during the night. I remember it because that normally never happens. As I was lying there next to my partner, I heard it. The sound of footsteps dancing along the street. My daughter is 7. She's got the room next to us on the second floor. How do I begin this story, or rather experience I suffered? There is no place I can find that will house me, because she is right behind me when I get a little comfortable. I don't know who she is, but for some reason she had latched herself to me. A while ago, I had given her a name, Razormouth, and went into witness protection, but that lasted for a while before the team that was investigating was disbanded and I lost protection. All that time, she was the scratching in the walls and the whispers that could be heard when I tried to sleep. The disappearances did not stop, but they became sporadic as the police were actively looking for her. I tried to reach out to the detective about the appearances, but they were dismissed. It was after the lifting of the protection when things became worse for me. The detective disappeared a week after being removed from the case. The policeman who responded to my call also disappeared, only their remains were found later, but no description on what was found. I feared for my safety, so I ran to another town hoping that I could not be followed. This town was small and made up of the remains of old lumber workers. It was isolated and I found work at a store. Life seemed to get back to normal, but I was still looking over my shoulder and it was good that I did. One winter, while walking to a house for a delivery, the snowfall was heavy and I could barely see 6 feet in front of me. I was using a flashlight to navigate as the house I was going for delivery was just 2 doors down from where I lived. It was cold and my bones ached from the chill. As I walked, I sensed that someone was staring at me. I tried to stop and look for the source of this feeling, but the cold would go from creeping to freezing me if I stopped, so I kept moving until I saw the shadow ahead of me. The profile was burned into my memory, and I saw the right hand waving at me like a greeting. I stopped and stared at it. I wanted to run, but was frozen in fear. The figure came into view, and that was when I finally saw who she was. She looked gaunt and her skin was pale. Her gait reminded me of a miner hunched over, and her hair was white with red streaks. My body began to shake uncontrollably, and I took an involuntary step back and, in the process, tripped and tumbled down. I tried to keep her in sight, but lost it when I fell and hit my head on the pavement. It took a moment for that dizziness to clear, but the cold was making things worse as my legs were numb from the cold. I began looking around for her, and she was gone. I walked over to where she stood, and there was a blood trail leading to the house I was to deliver to. I walked to the house and found the front door open. I pushed the door in and inside, just like last time, blood was everywhere. I rushed out to throw up and tried to regain control, and when I finally looked up, I saw her standing at the door. I tried to run, but tripped over something in the snow. She was rushing forward, and I saw her smile. The teeth were like metal nails. I used my torch as baton to protect myself and tried to strike at her as she was upon me. I felt it connect with her hand, and it was like hitting a tree branch. I recoiled, and she used that opportunity to stab me with a spike, and I screamed. That scream alerted, and I heard a shout. Razormouth heard it too. She brought her face close to mine, and I could see that her teeth were sharpened nails, and I looked into her dead eyes. The stench of rotten flesh wafted from her mouth. I tried to break away. She then slapped me, and just as I lifted my hand for protection, she took a bite out of arm just below the joint and tore off a chunk of muscle. I screamed and a shot rang out near me. She looked up and bolted from there. The neighbor had heard the commotion and came to see what was happening. Seeing me bleeding on the ground and the blood trail leading to the house, he shouted back to his wife to call the sheriff. He came over to me and tried to help me. I told him to stay alert because she could be near. "Who was that? You are bleeding." "Look, just stay put. Let me check the house." I tried to cover my wound, but the pain and cold was making it worse. I almost passed out as I heard more people approach the house. I felt my joints stiffen and I tried to get up but fell again. I was trying to find some place to shelter as most of the people were too interested in the house and its former residents than me. I made it to the neighbor's porch before passing out from the pain and cold. I woke up in the clinic bed and found the doctor and sheriff hovering over me. They were trying to talk to me, but it was all a haze of words and I passed out again. I finally came to and found a deputy sitting on a chair across the room. He was reading a newspaper when he saw me awake. Rushing out, he told me to stay awake and left the room. Soon, a nurse came in to check, followed by the doctor. I was asked a bunch of questions by the doctor and was informed that a good chunk of meat was taken from my arm and it would take a long time to heal. In the process, I would lose a lot of strength, leading the hand to be all but useless. The sheriff showed up and he had his barrage of questions, which I tried to answer as best as I could. He informed me that the scene in the house looked like a bear had gotten in and basically made a mess of the house. The old couple that lived there were basically chewed up and left to rot. I was lucky to survive the mad woman. I just wanted to leave now as I could feel her eyes on me when no one was around, and when I looked out the window I could see a shadow hovering on the other side. Who was she? I kept asking myself, for my safety deputies were stationed in my room and the sheriff said the killer might return to finish the job. All the while I kept thinking of what could have happened if I did not scream. My life hung in the balance, and that balance was the trigger of a rifle. A week later, I was formally released from the clinic and was taken to my lodgings. I was asked to wait as a state trooper went through the house to check. I was finally allowed in, and when I walked around, I saw something out of place in the kitchen. The refrigerator had a note stuck on it. I have a taste. Now I will finish the meal.
Friends, if you like these stories, be sure to subscribe and like this video. And also leave a comment telling us what you think about these stories.